On a freezing winter night in downtown Chicago, a single dad working as a waiter slid a white envelope back across the table, $1,000 in cash untouched. The woman staring at him was Vivian Sterling, a powerful CEO no one had ever dared refuse. But when Elias Brooks turned to leave, his coat sleeve slipped just enough to reveal the jagged scar on his wrist. Vivian's breath caught instantly. She knew that scar. 8 years ago, it belonged to the sharpest strategist she had ever seen, the man her industry destroyed, erased, and buried. Now he was serving tables in silence. The ivory room did not advertise itself. It had no sign above the door, no velvet rope, no bouncer standing in the cold to make the sidewalk feel like an audition. People who needed to ask how to get in had already answered the question for themselves. It occupied the ground floor of a century-old building on Michigan Avenue, and on January nights like this one, the windows fogged from within, blurring the candlelight into something painterly. Outside, Lake Michigan was pushing a wind down the corridor of the street that made even cab drivers keep their windows up. Inside, the room held approximately 40 covers and a silence that cost money to maintain. Elias Brooks had worked here for 3 years. He was not the kind of server who introduced himself by first name or crouched beside the table to create the illusion of intimacy. He moved through the room at a pace that was unhurried without being slow, refilling glasses before they were empty, clearing plates before the awkwardness of an empty dish could settle. The restaurant's regulars did not notice him the way you notice furniture. But neither did they notice him the way you notice a person. He occupied a useful middle space. Table 9 was his tonight. Graham Pierce had arrived first, as men like Graham always did, establishing ownership of the room before the woman he was meeting could establish her own. He ordered sparkling water without looking at the menu, which told Elias he had been here before and wanted the server to know it. He rearranged the cutlery on the left side of his place, setting twice. He checked his phone and set it face down with a firmness that was designed to be seen. Vivian Sterling arrived at 8:15. She did not apologize for the 3 minutes. She set her coat over the back of her chair herself, before Elias could offer to take it, not out of self-sufficiency but out of habit, the body language of someone who had learned not to wait for assistance because waiting had cost her too many rooms. She ordered still water and did not look at the menu either, but for different reasons than Graham. Elias read the table in the time it took to pour 2 glasses. Graham was negotiating from fear. The rearranged cutlery, the early arrival, the pointed phone placement, all of it was territory marking. The behavior of someone who did not believe the room already belonged to him. He would push hard tonight, harder than the deal warranted, and it would cost him credibility at exactly the wrong moment. Vivian was waiting. She had the stillness of someone who understood that silence was not a vacuum to be filled, but a pressure to be applied. She would let Graham expand into the space, and then, at a moment of her choosing, she would compress it. Elias brought bread. He placed the basket slightly closer to Vivian's side of the table. A small thing. An adjustment so minor, it registered nowhere consciously, but it shifted the spatial center of the table by 6 inches and gave Graham's hands nowhere comfortable to rest. Graham began his pitch 12 minutes in. Elias refilled their water at the 14-minute mark, arriving at a moment when Graham was building toward a number. The interruption was courteous and completely routine. It cost Graham his rhythm. He had to find his place again, and arrived at the number with slightly less momentum than he had intended. Vivian's expression did not change. She made a counteroffer. It was low, insultingly low, in the way that only the best negotiators can manage without appearing rude. Graham's jaw tightened. He reached for the breadbasket. His hand found the edge of the table where the basket was not. The dinner continued. By the time dessert arrived, Graham had conceded 4 points and was working to convince himself he had won 2 of them back. Vivian ate her chocolate torte with the precision of someone who was not thinking about the torte at all. When Elias placed the check holder on the table, Vivian took it before Graham could. She removed a white envelope and set it on the table between herself and Elias. "For exceptional service," she said. Elias looked at the envelope without touching it. He had been doing this long enough to know what $1,000 in a restaurant envelope felt like from 3 feet away. The weight, the slight bulge, He had received generous tips before. He had accepted them with gratitude. This was different. This was a woman testing something herself or him. He wasn't certain. But the gesture had the quality of a question, not a gift. He slid the envelope back across the white linen. "Thank you," he said. The service was standard. "You don't owe me anything above what's already on the bill." Graham looked at him the way wealthy men look at people they consider irrational. Vivian looked at him the way people look at something they weren't prepared to see. Elias stepped back from the table. As he turned, his coat sleeve, the old one he wore over his uniform on cold nights, the one with the button missing at the left cuff, shifted upward 3 inches. The scar on his inner wrist caught the candlelight for less than 2 seconds before he was gone. Vivian Sterling sat with both hands flat on the table, not moving, long after Graham had said his goodbyes and gathered his coat. She knew that scar. She knew the angle of it, the way it curved slightly left before it stopped. 8 years was a long time. But there were certain things that did not blur. The back exit of the ivory room opened onto a service alley that smelled of grease and cold concrete. Elias changed out of his uniform in the staff room, hanging the white dress shirt, with the care of someone who owned 2, and stepped into the alley at 11:47. His car was a 2009 Honda Accord, with 180,000 miles on it, and a heater that worked on the driver's side, and speculated on the passenger's side. He had learned to put a folded blanket on the passenger seat in January. Not for himself. For Lily, on the nights she rode with him. Tonight she was home. He drove west through the grid of the city, through neighborhoods where the buildings got shorter and the streetlights more occasional. The snow from 2 days ago had compacted into gray ridges along the curbs. His exhaust made white plumes in the dark. The apartment building on Costner was a 6-story brick structure from the 1960s. The kind of building that had been solid once and had simply continued to be solid out of stubbornness rather than upkeep. The elevator was reliable. The hallway carpets were not. He took the stairs. His mother opened the door before he knocked. Margaret Brooks was 63 and had the body of a woman who had been standing in kitchens her whole life, slightly forward in the shoulders, calves like cable, a particular economy of motion in everything she did. She handed him a plate covered in foil without speaking and pointed down the hall. He understood. Lily was asleep. He set the plate on the kitchen counter and walked quietly to the small bedroom. Lily was 7 years old, and she slept with her mouth slightly open and her hands curled near her chin, as though she were still deciding whether to be worried about something. She had fallen asleep in her school clothes again. A drawing was crumpled under her left arm. He eased the drawing out. It was a house with a very large sun and 2 figures in the yard, one tall and one short. The tall figure was holding a kite. The short figure was holding what appeared to be a hot dog. He set the drawing on her nightstand and covered her properly and stood in the doorway for a moment without doing anything. His mother was at the kitchen table when he came back. She would stay the night. She always did. On late shifts. "Good night?" she asked. "Quiet," he said. He sat with her for a while. She drank tea. He ate what she had made: roasted chicken, rice, a salad that was better than it needed to be. Margaret Brooks did not make food that was worse than it needed to be. After she went to sleep, he sat alone in the kitchen. The building settled around him. The refrigerator ran. Somewhere above him, a pipe knocked once and was silent. He looked at his left wrist on the table and thought, briefly, about the woman who had stared at it for 2 seconds in a candlelit room and had not moved. He had not looked back at her. He had gone to table 11 instead, where a couple was deciding between 2 desserts and needed a gentle nudge toward the crème brûlée. Which was better? But he had felt her watching. The specific quality of it, not the casual glance of a diner cataloging the staff, but the focused attention of someone who had recognized something and was deciding what to do with the recognition. He knew the difference. He had spent years in rooms full of people who watched other people for strategic advantage. He could feel the difference between assessment and discovery. This had been discovery. He had kept moving. Table 11, then table 3. Then the side station to restock the bread. He had done the work of the evening with the same deliberate ordinaries he always brought to it, and he had not thought about the woman at table 9 again until after his shift ended, when the white envelope was still there on the linen because no one had moved it, and the busser had brought it back to him with confusion. He had set it in the lost and found. He turned his wrist over so the inside faced down and reached across for the rest of his water. The 62nd floor of the Sterling Group Tower faced northeast, and on clear winter nights, you could see the ice shelf forming on the lake. Vivian kept one lamp on in the corner. The overhead lights were too bright for thinking. She was thinking now. The deal with Hargrove Capital had been deteriorating for 11 days. The due diligence had surfaced complications in the Hargrove portfolio that her team had not flagged and should have a series of shell-structured liabilities that had been papered over so many times they had become nearly invisible, the way old renovations become invisible in old buildings until the wall comes down. Her VP of Strategy, a confident man named Derek Wills, had presented 3 solutions that morning. All 3 addressed the visible damage. None of them addressed the structure underneath. She had been in rooms with people who could see structure her whole career. There were very few of them. She opened the filing archive on her secure server. Not the current year. Not the previous year. She went back 8 years and moved through folders the way you move through an attic slowly, not entirely sure what you were looking for until you found it. The photograph was in a project file from a strategic retreat, a 3-day offsite in Wisconsin. 12 people in a room. Whiteboards behind them, covered in frameworks. Someone had taken the photo without announcing it. So everyone was caught mid-process, looking at something, writing something. Halfway through a thought, he was in the back right corner. Elias Mercer, as she had known him then. He had used his mother's maiden name for the consulting contract Brooks, not Mercer, and she had not known that until now, until she was looking at the photo and seeing the angle of a jaw she had seen in a service alley 2 hours ago. His left wrist was resting on the whiteboard ledge. The scar was visible. She had wondered about the scar once. At the time, she had not asked. She remembered the retreat in Wisconsin. She remembered who had talked the most, and who had said the least, and who had said the things that mattered. She remembered a man in the back right corner, saying, quietly, that the model they were building had a false assumption at the foundation, and that everything built on top of it would eventually lean the same way. Everyone had paused. Victor Hale had said, with the warmth of someone who has just been shown to be incorrect, that the concern was theoretical and that they had deadlines to meet. 2 months later, the deal had leaned. Exactly the way he said it would. 3 months after that, Elias Mercer was gone. She had been a VP then. Junior enough that the conversations Victor Hale had with the managing partners happened above her and without her. She had heard the word breach in a hallway. She had heard confidentiality in another. By the time she understood what was being built against him, the structure was complete and the door was closed. She had not gone to the door. She had told herself she had no evidence. That her instinct was insufficient. That stepping into a fight she did not fully understand would accomplish nothing and cost her everything. She had been right about the last part. She had convinced herself she was right about the first. Now, sitting in a lamp-lit office at 1 a.m. with snow falling on a frozen lake, she understood the distinction between those two things in a way she had not permitted herself to understand it at the time. She closed the archive. Outside, the snow was very fine and very steady, the kind that accumulated without drama. She called Nathan Cole on a Tuesday. Nathan worked in the unglamorous margin between corporate investigation and background research. He was good at what he did in the way that truly useful people are good. Not flashily, but reliably. He had worked for Vivian twice before. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He called back 4 days later. Elias Brooks, he said. 38 years old. 1 daughter. Age 7. Lily Brooks. Currently residing in the Austin neighborhood. Employed at the Ivory Room restaurant for 3 years, previously at 2 other establishments. Before that, a 4-year gap with minimal footprint. Before that, he paused. Essentially nothing. The professional record just stops. Nothing with the name Mercer? A brief silence. You knew him before. Yes. There's nothing under that name that connects to the current identity. Whatever link existed between the two periods, he didn't just walk away from it. He dismantled it. Different name for the work history. Different address history. The only thing consistent is the daughter's records. She was born 7 years ago, which means she was born right around the time the prior record ends. Vivian was quiet. He's not hiding from anything legal, Nathan said. There are no warrants, no judgments against him. He's just absent, she said. Yes. She thanked him and ended the call and sat with the word, absent, as though he had decided that the world which had held his former self was not a world worth being present in, and had stepped out of it entirely. Not retreated, not hidden, simply stopped participating. She understood that differently now than she would have understood it a year ago. A year ago, she would have filed it under stubbornness or defeat. Now, she recognized it as a kind of surgery. Radical and probably painful, and performed without anesthesia. She thought about the white envelope coming back across the linen tablecloth. The thing about a man who has already walked away from everything is that he has already decided what he will and will not accept. He is not bluffing. There is nothing in the gesture to call. She thought about this for a long time. In the conference room down the hall, Derek Wills and his team were working late on the Hargrove problem. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of a presentation being rehearsed. The same phrases, slightly adjusted, being tried again. She thought about Victor Hale, who was now a senior partner at a firm in Boston, whose name appeared in industry profiles with words like decisive and principled, whose career had not leaned at all. She thought about what it meant to have a debt that the person you owed did not know was outstanding. She found the address in the report Nathan had given her. She drove herself. She did not bring anyone. It was a Thursday afternoon in late January. The sky was the particular white-gray of winter in the Midwest, the kind that feels like a ceiling rather than a sky. The residential streets here were narrow, and the parked cars on both sides made them narrower. She pulled up a half block from the building and sat for a moment. She had planned to go directly to the door. She had rehearsed something approximate, not a script, but a direction. Directness seemed the only approach that would not immediately fail. Then she saw them. The small yard behind the building was visible through a chain-link fence from where she had parked. It was not much of a yard, a rectangle of concrete and frozen dirt, a rusted basketball hoop with no net. A patch near the building's back wall where someone had attempted a garden in warmer weather. Snow covered most of it in a thin, even layer. Elias was pulling Lily on a red plastic sled. Not a real sled, the kind that comes in one piece from a department store. The cheap toboggan style. He was walking backward through the thin snow, holding the yellow cord. Pulling slowly enough that the ride felt like something. Faster enough that it actually moved. Lily was wearing a coat 2 sizes too large for her, and a hat with a pom-pom, and her mittens were on the wrong hands, and she did not care at all. She was narrating everything. Vivian could not hear the words from where she stood, but she could see the movement of it, a continuous stream of commentary, observation, instruction, possibly complaint. Elias was nodding with great seriousness at intervals, as though the narration contained information he needed. He turned the sled at the end of the concrete strip and began pulling her back the other direction. Lily grabbed for the cord to help steer, and the sled listed left, and she went sideways off of it into a thin pile of snow near the fence. Vivian tensed. Elias crouched down immediately. He was saying something. Whatever he said, Lily looked at him for a moment, and then burst out laughing, the wide-open, total body laugh of a child who has just been told something genuinely funny about falling down. She grabbed a handful of snow and threw it at him from 2 feet away. It hit him in the chest. He looked down at his coat with an expression of profound theatrical offense. Lily laughed harder. He helped her up. She climbed back onto the sled. He resumed pulling. Vivian stood at the fence for another 10 minutes. When Lily went inside, called by a voice from the building's back door. Probably the grandmother from the report, Vivian walked around to the front entrance and waited. Elias came around the corner of the building 2 minutes later, coiling the yellow cord around his hand, sled tucked under his arm. He saw her and stopped, not with surprise, with a stillness that said he had half expected something like this, though perhaps not today. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Miss Sterling," he said. The use of her name told her he had known who she was at the restaurant. She had wondered. "I won't take much of your time," she said. "You won't take any of it, if you're here to offer me a job. I'm here because I know what Victor Hale did to you." The stillness changed quality. It was the same surface but a different interior, the way a lake looks the same, from shore, before and after. Something large moves beneath it. "There's an email," she said. "In the archive from that year." He directed the alteration of the access logs. "I saw it last week. I haven't told anyone." He was quiet for a moment. A car moved down the street behind her. "Why are you telling me?" he said. "Because you deserve to know it exists." And nothing. There's no and. He looked at her steadily. He had the eyes of someone who had learned to let silence do the work that questions used to do. "I want you to come back," she said. "The Hargrove deal is collapsing because my team can't see what they're not looking for. You could see it in an hour. I know you could, and I know that I don't deserve to ask you for that." He said, "Then don't. I know. I had 4 years of my career erased. I had my name attached to something I didn't do. I had a daughter who was 8 months old and no income and no references and no way back in that didn't require me to spend every dollar and every hour fighting a story I didn't write." He said this without heat. "The way you describe the weather. I chose not to fight it. I chose her instead. I don't regret it." "I know," she said again. "The world you're asking me to come back to, it's the same world. The names change. The mechanics don't." "I know." He looked at her for a long time. The winter light was going flat and thin at the edges of the afternoon. Then, "What are you actually here for?" She had rehearsed a direction, but she had not rehearsed this particular question, which was the most honest one available. She thought about it. "I'm not sure," she said. "I think I needed to see that you were all right." Something crossed his face that she could not name exactly. Not softness and not contempt. Something in between that had the quality of recognition. "We're all right," he said. He looked toward the building. "You should go." She went. The week after she visited Kostner Street, Vivian could not work efficiently. This was new for her. She had managed crises before, the kind that kept normal people awake and kept her sharpened to a useful point. She had always had the ability to compress anxiety into focus. It was, in fact, the thing she was most known for among people who worked for her. Vivian Sterling does not panic. Vivian Sterling identifies the problem and addresses it. Now she sat in board meetings and found her mind moving sideways. The Hargrove deadline was 17 days out. Derek Wills presented an updated framework on a Wednesday. It was better than the previous version marginally, in the way that a leaning tower is marginally better if you add a coat of paint. The underlying structure was still the structure. A board member named Richard Alton pulled her aside after the meeting. Richard was 71 years old and had made 3 significant fortunes in his life, which gave him the standing to say unpleasant things pleasantly. "I want to be direct with you," he said. "Please, if this deal concludes the way it's currently moving, the board will have a conversation about leadership. I want you to be prepared for that conversation." She thanked him and walked back to her office and closed the door and stood at the window looking at the lake. The problem was not that she was afraid of losing the position. She had been afraid of that before and had handled it. The problem was that she kept looking at the Hargrove file and seeing a version of Elias's face, the expression, when she had said there was no and he had looked at her with that uncertain something that was not quite belief and not quite its opposite. She was starting to understand something about her own history that was uncomfortable. She had spent 8 years being very good at her job. She had promoted the right people, made the right calls, defended her team in the moments that required defense and challenged them in the moments that required challenge. She was not a cruel person. She was not dishonest. But she had been, at a critical moment in a room in Wisconsin, someone who chose her position over someone else's truth. And she had called it pragmatism because that was the word that made it possible to continue. She thought about Elias in the yard, pulling the sled. She thought about the child on it, that total body laugh, the mitten on the wrong hand. He had not looked like a man who had been destroyed. He had looked like a man who had chosen what to build next with the rubble. The distinction mattered to her now more than she could have predicted. She pulled up the Hargrove file and stared at it. She thought, he would see it in 20 minutes. She thought, you don't get to use him. She closed the file. She found it on a Friday night. She had been in the archive for a different reason, looking for documentation related to a clause in the original Hargrove letter of intent that her legal team was disputing. The search parameters were broad. The archive was old. It surfaced adjacent files that were technically within the date range but had nothing to do with Hargrove. One of them was a folder labeled with Victor Hale's initials and a date from 8 years prior. She almost moved past it. She did not. The email chain was 6 messages long. The first was from Victor Hale to a man named Craig Dutton, who had been on the IT security team at the time. It instructed Dutton to pull the access log from a particular server and reframe the timeline so the pattern is clear. The second was Dutton asking for clarification on what reframe meant. The third was Hale, very clearly, explaining that certain timestamps needed to appear earlier than they did. By the fourth message, the language had shifted entirely to the neutral and procedural, the grammar of people who have agreed on what they are doing, and no longer need to name it. She read all 6 messages twice. Then she opened a new encrypted file, copied the chain into it, added the file header information that established its origin in the archive, time-stamped and metadata intact, and stored it behind her personal encryption key. She sat back. The building was nearly empty. The cleaning crew had come through an hour ago. The ambient sound of the office at night was different from the day, not quiet exactly, but reduced, like a conversation moved to the next room. She thought about what Nathan had said. He didn't just walk away from it. He dismantled it. She thought about the scar on a left wrist. About a man who had chosen not to spend years fighting in a language the game was rigged against, who had taken his daughter and built a different size of life. She thought about the envelope going back across the white linen, the absolute stillness of it, and she thought, he sent himself away from all of this, so his daughter would not grow up watching him fight. And here it is, intact, waiting. She did not call him. She was not sure yet what doing the right thing looked like. She only knew that the wrong version of it was the one where she used the email as leverage, where she gave him the evidence in exchange for his presence in a conference room. That version turned justice into a transaction, and a transaction into something she could tell herself she deserved. She thought for a long time. The Hargrove deadline was 9 days out when the email arrived. It came to her private address, not the Sterling Group domain, the one only 12 people in the world had at 2:17 in the morning. The sender address was a string of letters and numbers that routed through 2 anonymization layers. She knew enough about digital communication to know this was not accidental. The attached file was 31 pages. She started reading it the way you start reading something you already know will be definitive slowly, because the pace is the only thing you can control. It was a structural analysis of the Hargrove acquisition, not of the surface-level liabilities her team had identified, and not of the narrative that Hargrove's lawyers had constructed around them. It went underneath both. It identified the original point at which Hargrove's internal accounting had diverged from its reported accounting a decade earlier, a single decision made in a single quarter that had been papered over with structural creativity ever since. It traced every subsequent adaptation. It showed the accumulated lien. Then it proposed a restructuring of the acquisition terms that would require Hargrove to resolve the underlying divergence before closing, which meant Hargrove would either come to the table with the real numbers or exit the deal without extracting the terms they had been working toward. Either outcome protected Sterling Group. The analysis was written in the style of someone who had thought through an argument so completely that they had no patience for preamble. There were no pleasantries, no caveats about the author's limitations, no hedging. It read like a person describing something they could see clearly to a person who was standing in the wrong place to see it. She had been in rooms with people who could see structure her whole career. There were very few of them. She held the laptop with both hands and read the document twice, and then set it down on the edge of her desk and looked at the window. The lake was dark. The lights of the far shore made small broken lines on the water. He had done it anonymously. He had done it without asking for acknowledgement, without leaving a way to respond, without tethering the help to anything he might receive in return. Early, without sentiment, and he had handed it over and walked away. She thought of how long it must have taken him to write it. Hours. At a kitchen table, probably. After his daughter was asleep, she pressed her palms flat against the desk and stayed there for a long time. Then she forwarded the document to Derek Wills with a single line. Execute this. Full team, starting Monday. She did not tell Derek where it came from. She sat in the empty office as the city outside made its nighttime sounds. And she understood, in a way she had not before, the difference between being helped by someone and being worthy of it. The Hargrove deal stabilized in 11 days. It did not close on the original terms. Hargrove's principals, faced with a restructuring demand that required transparency about the underlying accounting, chose to renegotiate rather than exit. The new terms were less advantageous to Hargrove and more protective of Sterling Group. Richard Alton called it a strong outcome. Derek Wills took appropriate credit for the execution, which was correct. He had executed it well. The architecture was not his, but Vivian said nothing about that to anyone. She spent 5 days thinking about the email in the encrypted file. On the 6th day, she called her personal attorney, a woman named Claire Holt, who had represented Vivian for 11 years and who was constitutionally incapable of dramatizing anything. She also called Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist she had worked with once on a regulatory matter, whose reputation for precision she trusted more than his reputation for discretion. She called the ethics board of the Financial Strategy Association, of which Victor Hale was still a listed member. She called 2 other people whose positions gave them standing. She did not have to initiate certain conversations. She did not call Elias. She did not attach any conditions. She did not construct a scenario in which the revelation of the truth was connected to anything she wanted in return. She handed over the email, the metadata, the archive provenance, and Claire Holt's initial legal framing. And she stepped back. It was not a comfortable feeling. It felt, in fact, like releasing something before you were ready to let it go. She went home that night to her apartment on the 34th floor, an apartment that was large and well-appointed and slightly too quiet, and she made herself dinner and sat with it and did not think about the outcome. She was not sure, at that moment, what outcome she was even hoping for. She had done the thing because it was the thing that needed to be done. She had been carrying it for 8 years without knowing she was carrying it, and now she was not, and the absence of it felt strange rather than light. She slept better than she had in a month. 12 days later, the story moved. It did not begin as a front-page story. It moved the way these things actually move: an inquiry from a compliance board, a notification sent to the relevant parties, a source briefed by a journalist, a legal filing that became public record. Victor Hale's firm issued a statement that said more than it intended to. The Financial Strategy Association opened a formal review. An archived record, authenticated and provenance established, showed that a senior executive had directed the manipulation of internal documentation to support the termination of a contracted strategist. The name Elias Mercer appeared in the account. It was connected to no wrongdoing. The wrongdoing belonged to someone else. The story was complete in the factual sense, but it was not a story anyone would make a film about. It was the kind of justice that happens in institutional language, slow and procedural, and almost entirely bloodless. There was no courtroom moment. There was no confrontation. There was a correction, entered into record, available to anyone who looked. Elias read it on a Tuesday morning. He had the newspaper, an actual paper one, a habit from his mother, open on the kitchen table. Lily was still asleep. The coffee was 3 minutes from being ready. The apartment was in its early morning state, which was his favorite. Not clean exactly, but settled. Things in the places they had arrived at through use rather than arrangement. He read the account twice. He did not feel, as he had sometimes imagined he would feel if this day ever came, a sudden release of pressure. He felt something quieter, more like the sensation of a window opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. Not dramatic, just air now. He sat with it until the coffee finished. When Lily patted in, still in her pajamas with the cartoon suns on them, he was looking out the window at the alley below, where snow was falling again, the fine, persistent kind. "Dad," she said, with the mild urgency of a 7-year-old assessing a situation, "you look weird." "I look fine," he said. "Your face is different." He looked at her. How? She considered this. Like when you don't know what the weather's going to be, and then it turns out nice. He got up and poured her cereal. She climbed into her chair and watched him with the alert attention of a person who was keeping an eye on something. "Is it good weird?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He handed her the cereal. She accepted it with the authority of someone who had closed the subject. He went to the counter and picked up his phone. He found the number he had for Vivian Sterling, the one she had given him at the door of the building on Costner, the one he had not used. He held it for a moment. Then he called. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "You didn't attach any conditions." A brief pause. "No, you could have. I know. Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside his window, the snow continued. Lily was narrating the serial, describing, apparently, what the raisins were doing. Vivian said, "Because it wasn't a transaction, you weren't owed justice in exchange for anything, you were just owed it." He looked at his left wrist on the counter. The scar was its ordinary morning self, visible, present. Not especially meaningful in the light of a kitchen he knew well. "Thank you," he said. He did not say anything else. Neither did she, for a moment. "I'd like to talk," she said finally. "Not about work. Not about anything you're obligated to hear. Just talk. If you're willing." He was quiet. "I can be at the coffee place on Augusta by 10, he said. "I'll find it," she said. The place on Augusta was called Pemberton's, and it had been there since the 1980s, and showed no sign of having changed its mind about anything since. The booths were dark wood. The cups were heavy ceramic. The menu was a laminated single page. On winter mornings it smelled of coffee and old radiator heat. Vivian arrived first, which surprised her. She had expected to arrive second. She had expected, somewhere in the back of her reasoning, that he might not come at all, that the phone call might have been the thing he was willing to give, and the rest would remain closed. She had been prepared to accept that. He came in at 10:03, coat dusted with snow, and took the booth across from her without ceremony. He ordered coffee from the server without looking at the menu, the same way she had ordered water at the Ivory Room, not from habit of the place, but from not needing to think about it. They sat for a moment. "I'm not here to offer you anything," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to say what I should have said 8 years ago, which is that I knew something was wrong and I did not act on it. And that had consequences for you that I had no right to impose." He looked at his coffee cup, then at her. "I know that too," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm saying it because it's true and because you deserve to hear it from me directly." He was quiet for a moment. In the booth adjacent to them, an older man was reading a folded newspaper, with the deliberate care of someone who was in no hurry about anything. "I made my peace with it a long time ago," Elias said. "Not with what happened, with the fact that it happened, and I couldn't change it. Those are different things." "Yes," she said. "I had about 18 months where I was very angry." He said this matter-of-factly. Not just at Victor. At all of it. At the whole mechanism. And then Lily got sick, just an ear infection, nothing serious. But it was 2 in the morning, and I was alone in an urgent care waiting room, and I realized that I had been spending every quiet moment I had on something I had zero control over, and she was the one thing in the world I could actually affect. He paused. "So I stopped. You made a choice. I made a choice about where to put the energy I had. I don't know if it was noble. It was just the only thing that made sense to do." She held her cup with both hands. Through the window, the snow was still falling on Augusta Street, and the people passing on the sidewalk were bent slightly into it, doing the ordinary work of moving through a winter day. "The analysis you sent," she said. "I didn't send anything." She looked at him. He met her eyes with an expression of complete neutrality that contained, somewhere in it, the faintest edge of something else. "All right," she said. "How did the deal land?" he asked. "Better than it would have, because someone who can see structure put the structure on paper." He nodded once, as though this were a sufficient accounting. "I'm not going to try to recruit you," she said. "That's not good," he said. "Because the answer hasn't changed." "I know." They were quiet for a moment. The server came by and refilled both cups without being asked, which was exactly what the place on Augusta did, and which Vivian noticed and appreciated. "What do you want from this?" Elias said. From this conversation, specifically, she thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure I want anything from it. I think I needed it to exist. A conversation that isn't about a deal or a negotiation or something I'm trying to accomplish. Just a conversation." He looked at her. It was the way he had looked at the table in the ivory room. Not with warmth exactly, but with a quality of attention that felt more complete than most people's warmth. "You're lonely," he said, not unkindly. She did not argue it. "The kind of life you're describing," he said. "I know what it costs." "Yes. You traded a lot for it." "Yes. And now you're sitting in a coffee shop in a neighborhood you didn't know existed last month talking to a man who waits tables. A man who waits tables and writes 31-page structural analyses at 2 in the morning," she said. Something moved in his expression. It was brief, and it was not a smile exactly, but it was in the vicinity of one. The door opened, and a cold gust came in with it. And then behind the cold gust came Lily, still in her pom-pom hat, led by Margaret Brooks, who looked at the room with the eyes of a woman who had been in enough rooms to know which ones were fine and which ones weren't. This one, her expression said, was probably fine. Lily spotted her father with the immediate target acquisition of a 7-year-old seeking a known person in an unfamiliar space, and moved toward the booth with confidence. "Grandma said we could come," she announced, as though this were the relevant authorization. "I see that," Elias said. Lily looked at Vivian with the frank assessment that children apply to adults before social training teaches them to pretend they aren't doing it. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Vivian said. "Do you know my dad?" "A little." Lily considered this. "From where?" "From his work. He works at the restaurant," Lily said. "He brings food to people." "He does. He brought you food?" "He did." Lily seemed to find this a satisfactory account. She climbed into the booth beside her father with the ease of someone who climbs into every booth everywhere, and Margaret slid into the seat beside Vivian, with a brief nod that functioned as a complete introduction. "Coffee," Margaret said to the server passing by. The server, accustomed to Pemberton's regulars, brought it immediately. Lily had produced, from some interior pocket of her too large coat, a small folded paper. She set it on the table and unfolded it with seriousness. It was a drawing, a figure on a sled, and above the figure, stars. "I'm going to put it on the fridge," she said, speaking to no one in particular and everyone present. "It's good," Elias said. "I know," Lily said. The stars were hard. Margaret had her coffee and was looking out the window at Augusta Street, with the expression of someone who has seen enough winters to know that this one would pass like the others, and that this was neither comforting nor distressing, simply true. Vivian looked at the drawing on the table between them. The sled, the stars, the figure rendered with the conviction that a child brings to the things she considers important. She looked up. Elias was watching her with the same quality of attention he had brought to everything else complete. Measured, not giving more than the moment asked for. She thought of what he had said in the yard. "The world you're asking me to come back to, it's the same world." She had agreed with him then. She still agreed with him. The world had not changed its mechanics. Victor Hale had been a symptom, not a cause. There would be other Victor Hales, other rooms where the wrong person had the votes and the right person had the exit. But she was also sitting in a coffee shop on a street she had driven past 100 times without stopping, in a booth with a woman who had made coffee for 60 years and a child who had given the stars in her drawing the appropriate difficulty they deserved. And Elias Brooks was across from her with his wrist on the table and snow in the creases of his coat. Outside, the snow kept falling on the street. He did not get up to leave. It was a small thing. It was, In the context of the last 8 years of his life, and the last 3 months of hers, a very small thing. But Vivian Sterling sat in a wooden booth in a coffee shop on Augusta Street in January, with snow on the window and a child's drawing between the cups. And she understood that a door she had not known was closed had, sometime in the last several minutes, opened. She did not know what was on the other side of it. She thought that was probably appropriate. The snow fell on Augusta Street until noon, and then it stopped. And the afternoon came in pale and clear. The kind of winter light that makes everything look like it has been washed. Lily ate a piece of chocolate cake that Margaret ordered without consulting anyone, which was the prerogative of grandmothers everywhere. Elias left his hand on the table, wrist up, scar visible in the winter light coming through the glass. He did not turn it over.